I'm sorry to break things up, but are you ready for the interview?
Well, I am, but I don't know if she is.
I'm more or less started my career in television by doing this for you.
Yeah.
For you.
Yes, I remember.
Absolutely. Stage 4, take 1. When did you start making the home movies, and why?
You know, I got sick of waiting at the telephone, for the telephone to ring from my agent in America. I don't have one here. No one wants to represent me. Waiting for an offer, you know, for a film. And I had this script called The Fall of the House of Usher, an amalgam of Poe stories in an updated horror movie with comedy and music. For 10 years I've been trying to set that up. Nearly got there on several occasions, but in the end they always withdrew and it was no good. So I thought, well, you know, hang on, how much, maybe I could make this film myself.
I mean, there's a lot of money going for grants for films, Arts Council money for films, lottery money for films. Have you applied for any of that money?
No, I haven't applied for any money because I know I wouldn't get it. You know, I'm just, you know, what, Russ, are you kidding? But why, you know, why?
The thing about Ken was that he was fanatical about filmmaking. He started making film, amateur films and so on, and towards the end of his life when he was skint, we would give him the occasional commission, say 1 a year. He turned his garden shed, literally, into a studio and was making home movies and casting anybody who knocked at the door. The postman would find he had a part, or somebody who lived in the next house would be called in to play this or that part. He just made films after film after film.
I did have a home movie projector at the age of 12, and that really turned me onto the possibilities, because I felt I was connected. I was actually instrumental in projecting that, you know, the image onto the screen, that the people in my dad's garage who came in out of the Blitz to contribute to the Spitfire Fund, you know, were on a diet of German expressionist films. They were the only ones I could get in the war. Fritz Lang, for instance, Siegfried. While the sons of Siegfried were actually dropping incendiaries on as Siegfried was slaying the fire-breathing dragon. Anyway, so I think that was the moment I knew I had to make... I was inspired by these films. They were amazing.
I think it's quite typical of a sort of petty bourgeois Southampton mentality. My mother's family, who knew the Russells quite well, all had the same sort of sense of humour, which is kind of end-of-pier Donald McGill, and this very energetic, vulgar sensibility which rather offends a certain British sensibility which prefers restraint. Russell lambasted critics all the time because they had this fetish about good taste, and he thought, rightly I think, that bad taste is much more invigorating.
And this is my sidekick, Nurse ABC Smith, Melvin Bragg.
How do you do?
Tulip Junction.
Pleased to meet you.
Delighted to meet you.
Good.
What do you think, Ken?
Not a bit over the top. I'd only have one red garter, sweetie.
Right.
So lose one.
There's something very untrammelled about him, and he's a fairly over-the-top person. But there's another side to him, obviously. The Elgar film belongs to a kind of tradition of English ruralism, which was very potent when he was growing up.
I met him when I first went to Monitor. I was 23 or something in the early 60s, and he was still in a glow from the amazing success of his film Elgar, which was amazing in that it was a television film, but it was treated as a great work of film, which was maybe one of the first times that had happened in television. He really saw images and music. Dialogue got in the way for Ken. He wasn't very interested in it, really, but he was interested in images, and he could match music to images in a way that I haven't seen bettered. At his best, Ken could do that better than anyone, and that was what he loved.
Hugh Weldon of Monitor, he had an extremely, as you know, analytical mind, and he could cut out the bullshit too, you know, of stuff that really wasn't essential to the story that you may have done because you just liked the idea of it.
It was very odd to convince you every inch of the way. For instance, I remember in Elgar, I remember a lot of my own films I made there. In Elgar, you have the kite flying sequence, and
yes.
you wanted that out. And you said, no, he really flew kites. He liked flying kites. That's what he did.
And I also said, look, he used to send telegrams to the Weather Bureau in London to Greenwich to say what will the winds be like over the Malvern Hills this afternoon. And when I told him that, he said, excellent, we've got to say that, old boy, or people won't believe it. They'll just think it's a metaphor for success, you know, and that won't do.
Back home with his daughter, Elgar took up kite flying, and as usual went headlong into a new hobby.
But he also said, as you know, he was Welsh Presbyterian. Of course, Elgar was a Catholic. And not too many bloody crucifixes, Russell. I got 3 in anyway.
He was an extraordinary man in that galaxy at Lime Grove, where most people had been to university, often Oxbridge, or been officers in the army and so on. Ken sat there with his pudding basin haircut, a bit like Friar Tuck, a bit plump as well, like Friar Tuck, saying somewhere between absolutely nothing and minimal sentences. And he would keep turning up with these extraordinary original films. Then we first worked together on the Debussy film, which in a sense was your first talkie.
Yeah.
Now, that caused very serious consternation at the BBC. People were outraged that actors should represent real people. I got rounded by having actors playing actors, and so we did a double thing on it. What did you think you were doing in the Debussy film?
It's an impression. You know, he was a musical impressionist. And I thought, well, let's make an impression of the man instead. And also we want to learn about him without Hugh Weldon's commentary, just underlining everything. So we worked out this idea of having a film director making a film on Debussy.
Cut! Stop it, for heaven's sake! What are you doing?
Who then talked to the actors.
Come along here.
The only thing you are really concerned about is the sea. Madame Bardac and Debussy stayed here whole summer, and it was here he finished writing La Mer, his greatest piece. He used to listen to the sea.
But she's not going to accept this. I mean, what's she going to think? She leaves her husband, a position in society, elopes with this composer, goes all the way to exotic Eastbourne, and then he sits down on the beach and listens to the sea. It won't work.
There's an interesting mix of you wanting to make the film in that way, because remember us talking about it, you lived down in Crystal Palace at the time, and us trying to outfox the system.
Yeah.
To do it in a way that they would accept it, because we knew that if you just wrote a direct play about screenplay, they wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
So.
Because we worked for, I mean, the programme we worked on was essentially documentary, wasn't it?
And that was a great strength. I don't knock it. They did some wonderful documentaries.
But then they were working on the idea of what a documentary was, which was a 1930s idea.
Yeah, but it's got more... I mean, we still, on this programme, work out what documentaries are, and the team I've got now working... I mean, the documentary is a lot more flexible, I think, than people gave it credit for. They thought it had run out of... No, we were there. They thought it had run out of steam in the early 60s, and it had. But I think it's more to do with you, and to say myself, wanting to just go in another direction with arts programmes and try another take on it. And the Debussy actually was a slight take-off point for you, wasn't it, in a way that you began to... There was a feeling that you began to steer your ship towards feature films.
Yeah.
Had your eye always been on feature films?
No, never. No, I have never looked upon television as second best to feature films. Ever, never, ever. To me, there's no difference. You're telling a story. And the odd thing being, of course, that on television I had much more freedom than ever I had on a feature film. Until very recently, it seemed to me that there was, and I think it's slightly reversed now, that television, it was an open book. You could go as far as you wanted. And I don't know, not having much money, as I said before, like we were on monitor, it makes you more inventive. You know, we couldn't create Paris of Debussy's time. So we brought him to Eastbourne, you know, with a perfectly valid reason for him being there. You know, generally speaking, you know, it sort of stimulates the phagocytes.
You left the BBC, and then once you got into your stride, you made films that caused a lot of waves then, and there's no doubt that Ken Russell was a huge star in the film and to British filmmaking. There was Women in Love, there was Music Lovers. You continued in a way to be inspired by art and artworks, even in Women in Love. Let's talk about Women in Love. Was Women in Love the next one?
No, I did a film, French Dressing, which I've been ashamed of all my life until I showed it to a friend a week ago, and I thought, this is a masterpiece. Why is he laughing? Why is he laughing?
Well, because I think it's great that you discover that your own work's a masterpiece.
I know, and then I saw a whole succession of films. I was shown to someone who was fond of my work but hadn't seen a lot. And as it went on, I began to think, this man is a genius. Whereas I've been sort of ashamed of, you know, I've had these terrible reviews and I've sunk lower and lower in, you know, self-esteem and so forth. But no, I'm quite special.
So let's go. What took you into Women in Love? What was the attraction of that? Because you said yourself earlier on, you had no literary education.
No. Never heard of Lawrence.
You never heard of Lawrence. You didn't read. You knew 50,000 times more than anybody that any of us knew about music, and about movies.
Yeah.
And that was.
Yeah.
I don't think you knew what the news was, and you certainly didn't know about books. So how did you come across Women in Love?
Well, I'd never heard of Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence. I knew there was a Lawrence who was in the desert, but then, you know, I rather thought probably it was him. And United Artists, they said, we've got a script, you know, we'd like you to consider. It's called Women in Love, and it's by D.H. Lawrence. And D.H. Lawrence, you know, never heard of him. And so I read the script, and it was one of the worst. It was unbelievably bad. And my agent said, read the book. So I read the book. I was, in the present day parlance, I've never used the word before, gobsmacked. It was amazing. And then I got onto you, didn't I?
Yeah.
And I said, you know, because obviously you were very au fait with Lawrence. And we worked on it together, didn't we?
We went through the book, we marked up the essential bits.
Yeah, and then it was, I had such a good team of actors too. I mean, they were Oliver Reed, Alan Bates, you know.
And at the top of their form.
Oh, absolutely.
You ever done any boxing?
No. Oh, you mean you may as well hit me?
You? You? Well, yes, perhaps in a friendly sort of way, of course.
Well, quite.
And it's interesting the way Bates and Reed played
Yes.
against each other, because they came from such different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And yet they were both powerful at that
Yes.
time and
Yeah.
charismatic on the screen.
Yeah.
It's undeniable. But you were still, as it were, being shocking. There's the nude wrestling scene between the men, which were shocking. Was that something you set out to do, or was it something that you said...
Well, it's in...
Anyway, on he went, and he had his career, which was a bumpy roller coaster career, but that thin seam of originality and surprise and bringing to the British film scene something that had never been there before, that didn't really desert him. And then we came to The Devils, and people started saying, this is an uncontrolled talent, this is a dark talent, we don't quite know what to make of this fellow. What was going on there?
They got it wrong. Although it was trashed by mostly people who never been to church or, you know, were not practicing Christians, it was also condemned by the Festival of Light, who never saw it, and various bishops who never saw it. So they can go get lost.
What about the sort of acting? Did you think that was one of the reasons why it got sort of flailed for being excessive?
The acting?
Well, do you think the acting felt to be over the top? Do you think it was all getting... There was a sense in which... I'm trying to get to the idea of certainly a talent getting out of control.
Well, it was hysteria, but you see, it was a hysterical situation because the authorities used to put on, you know, shows 3 times a day in the cathedral of the local nuns being depossessed of demons, and they were encouraged to go absolutely... How do you play that down? And you know, the favourite word of the English critics at that time, and I don't know if it's changed, was restraint. You know, but how do you treat a subject that is unrestrained, that is totally mad? And in the end, while everyone was watching these nuns freaking out, they blew the walls down.
Maybe God's coming out in sympathy at the moment.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of his life, in the last 15 years of his life, he started having a lot of minor strokes, and he became totally unbankable. And the BBC wouldn't commission him to do anything. So we at ITV on the South Bank show, we did. We commissioned him to do, I think, 14 films. And again, they were of variable quality, but when he was good, he was still better than most people around by quite a long way. He could pull it off. He could think of a scene. The scene could mean what he meant, what it looked like, but also carry other messages. His quirky casting often did pay off. He cast himself a lot of times, which often didn't pay off. But he was somebody. He was a real filmmaker.
Yes?
Pretty little birdie. Fly away, fly away.
The whole thing was stylized, you see. When, the king, Henry, she used to shoot Protestants. You shoot them and they used to dress them as blackbirds and get them to run along, and they had these guns and they shot the blackbirds. So, of course, I played Bye-Bye Blackbird.
Bye-bye, Blackbird.
Bye-Bye Blackbird wasn't wasn't composed for another 400 years. This guy's an imposter. But then, neither was film.